And without further ado, we turn it over. We have Tyler Rucker from No Ceilings coming on the program to talk a little Blazer draft. And Tyler, how you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing great. It's always a joy to this time of the year with the draft getting crazy, and thank you guys for having me on. I always enjoy this one.
Yeah, do you ever get worried that people only like you because we're 25 days away from the draft?
You know what? It's just so busy this time of the year. It doesn't really set in until probably months after. But now that you're bringing it to me, yeah, probably the anxiety will kick in a little bit. But no, it's fun. It's a fun time for everyone to get excited. I kind of feed off that energy because I'm like, yeah, let's talk basketball. Well, no better way.
Tyler, obviously the Blazers, they fall back in draft position back to 11. We have the weirdness that happens on lottery night with the top three being the most cursed top three in NBA history. And how that thing's going to shake things out. When you look at this Blazers team and you look at this roster, they have so much young depth already. When you're trying to see, project the board, and you guys at No Ceilings, you guys just put out your latest big mock. When you guys look at the Blazers in that range, who do you think is the best player available, and is that best player available the best fit?
It's tough for a team like Portland, which, I watched a lot of their games this year because it's just one of those things where you like to watch the young teams that are kind of built into the draft. And it's like, okay, what direction could they go in? And Portland's quickly putting so many impressive pieces together. They found gold with Tamani Kamara. They've got a lot of intriguing guys that I think are also ready to take that next step this year. So it gets tough with a team like that when you're projecting them in the draft because, obviously we could say they can go best player available, but at some point when you keep kind of doubling down on that, do you try to also kind of look at like, hey, what does the roster need a little bit? Now, I'm always a big believer of like, hey, trust your board, and if it's the best player available by far and it just happens to be a position you're pretty deep at, I still think you go with the talent. But Portland, I think, is really close to kind of taking that next leap. I thought, last year they really showed some stuff of a young team on the rise, and I think this is going to be a big year for them, and I think that's why this pick's going to be so interesting. So, a name to kind of throw out that is a really popular name right now, but I think Carter Bryant would be a really interesting fit with this Blazers team just because of the athleticism. You pair him with, someone like Scoot and Shaedon Sharpe on the perimeter. That's really fun in transition. And then Carter just kind of, matured pretty quickly this year when it came to like figuring out how to make an impact without, being the go-to bucket guy. So I think he's one of the better defensive wings in this class. So you're even talking about, putting him with Tamani Kamara. I mean, Carter's just one of the most popular names right now. So I think that would be a name that it would be like an upside swing for me, but also like a really good fit with a team like the Blazers that are kind of starting to build some nastiness defensively.
For those that aren't intimately familiar with the draft, the profiles, and a guy like Carter Bryant, who traditionally would have been somebody people would have seen come through here more regularly in the Pac-12 era, but I don't like necessarily doing direct comps. But when you're talking about a guy somebody might recognize, who does Carter Bryant kind of remind you of when he comes in the league, and who could he ultimately kind of project as?
Yeah, he's a fun one. A lot of us in No Ceilings, we've been trying to kind of talk about like who he reminds us of, and it's just one of those things where this year coming into the freshman, I'd seen him the last couple of years, and he's put on a ton of weight, a ton of muscle. All the intel checks out. You hear a lot of good stuff about him when it comes to his work ethic, his character. His interviews I've heard have been fantastic. So projecting him, I think he's got a lot more offensive upside than he shows. But like OG Anunoby, who's with the Knicks right now, has been a popular name a lot of our guys have thrown around. I have weird vibes. I kind of see like a little bit of like a Shane Battier with some crazy athleticism. Just kind of starting out, which is, you're saying picking that in the 11th spot, you might be like, what? But it's like, hey, if you get a guy playing, 13 plus years in the NBA with athleticism, you'd sign up for that right away. So I also think like another Arizona Wildcat, but like he's like Andre Iguodala a little bit. He doesn't have the handles. That's what kind of needs to be worked on with his game. Iguodala is much better like playmaker and ball handler, but much better shooter than Iggy was. So kind of a little bit of vibes in there, but you think about it and you're like, hey, those are three pretty good names to have around. So it's one of those players that's the big upside swing that if you look at his stats, you'd probably be like, why didn't he play more? And I think a lot of scouts were asking that question this year, like, hey, why is he playing more? But it was a veteran roster, and he found a way to make an impact. He was playing a lot towards the end of the year.
Tyler Rucker joins us from No Ceilings. We're talking NBA draft here. I love that you mentioned that the Blazers might be in a point where they feel like one more guy can make it happen. I think we kind of all assume that 1, 2, and 3 go the way we think. Could you by chance see the Blazers make a move and jump up in this draft to see if there is that missing piece that's more in like the 6 or 7 range, or do you think they'll be happy staying at 11?
It's one of those things with, especially with Portland. I feel like every time we do a mock draft, myself included, I feel like you get to them and you're just kind of a headache. Like, gosh, they could go in any direction here. So I do think if you want, there's a little bit of a drop off after that 6-7 spot. Now we don't know what teams like Washington and New Orleans are. They might be willing to move back and get, a bunch of future capital. And I'm a big believer of like, hey, if you have a guy you're in love with, go get your guy. So it wouldn't shock me if Portland's a team that says, hey, we're going to move up. We think this is the last piece we need at the puzzle to really have that foundation moving forward. Months ago, if you asked me about Colin Knippel, I thought it would be a dream fit for the Trailblazers, and I don't know if he's going to be there on the board still. So
he is not.
Maybe they could move up a little spot. It gets really interesting. I'm also curious to see if they can maybe try to double down on maybe they try to trade out. Maybe they try to get a veteran, like they struck gold with the Denny Avdia deal. Maybe you can scan the market or find that again. So they're in a great spot because this is a really deep guard draft, but there's a run there in that lottery where there's a lot of teams that don't need a guard. So it could also, talk to some teams and be like, hey, well, if you want to come up and get your guard, give us a vet. Let us get another piece. So they're in a good spot. I know it's never fun to hear that when you're a Trailblazers fan. You're like, we're picking 11th, but they're in a good leverage opportunity, I think, with a lot of teams trying to come up, or they could try to see if they can get up themselves.
The NBA draft is always very interesting because undoubtedly somebody will go in a position where we kind of go, well, that's interesting. The one that really jumps to my mind was when Cam Johnson went, 14 picks before anybody really thought he had a chance. I know particularly the Blazers had Cam Johnson on their board, and they ended up taking Nasir Little in that draft because they're like, oh, crap, Cam Johnson's gone, and a bunch of teams had to scramble. You hear names like Cedric Coward, Rasheer Fleming's a guy who's got a lot of juice around him. Nate Clifford is a guy you and I who Colorado State love. Who are some names that Trailblazers fans should watch, whether it's picking at 11 or let's say they like you mentioned, they move back because the Nets have 5 of the top 36 picks. Do the Blazers trade back and get 2 1s and somebody else or something along those lines, whatever machination? Who are some names you could see that kind of fly up a board and can kind of throw a wrench in, everyone's mocks?
Yeah, it's one of those years in which I think there's a lot of those names. You ask around the league right now, and you kind of get a different answer about each player. Like some teams are like, I could see him going lottery. Some are like, probably late first. And you get those each year, but this year it just seems there's such a variance with a lot of these names. Like Danny Wolf is kind of, I keep joking, I'm saying he's the joker in the deck of the whole draft. Like, I think some teams think like, hey, he could go early because it's one of those eye of the beholder players. 7-foot big man with guard skills. Wouldn't shock me if he goes in the 20s. Wouldn't shock me if he's going, top 15, just because I think one team might look at him and be like, this is such a unique player. It could give us a fun wrinkle. I think Noah Essengay has been a popular name right now. The Blazers obviously play, Ratio Farmall in the preseason, so they know about him plenty, but he's just had a great end of the year. He's kind of the upside swing. When I had asked around the league, I had a scout was like, someone's taking him top 12. They're just like, I'm convinced someone's going to swing on him. So I think he's maybe the one that could throw a little bit of a wrench to some, but I think that's where you're getting the upside swing type of players that could really climb. And then, if Portland moves back, hypothetically, I'm just a big Nate Clifford fan. I think he's one of those really high floor players that's just going to find a way to make an impact in a number of different ways. And you can play him in, a couple different, rotation variances. So Cedric Howard's also another one. That was a good shout. A lot of teams right now are like, hey, I have him here. I think I'm too low. So it's going to be really interesting. There's a lot of names that some people are thinking, hey, they're going to shock the public. The public's not ready because they're going to go much earlier than people think.
Tyler, we'll get you out on this. We'll let you have a little bit of fun. How many games can the Pacers win in the NBA Finals?
Oh gosh, 2.
2?
Yeah, 2. I think they'll get 2. It's so funny to think about, but like when you kind of look at it, I think they might match up pretty well, both teams. It should be a fun series. I know the NBA is probably pumped about the ratings, but I think it's going to be a really fun series. It's also pretty cool because it's 2 teams that have, in so many ways built through the draft or try to kind of find some pieces that, second team opportunities. So for me, I geek out on that stuff because there's a lot of teams I think that are taking a page out of teams like OKC right now. I think the Blazers are one of them. I think the Blazers are like, hey, let's keep hitting on the draft. We don't got to hit home runs. We got to just keep hitting singles and doubles and triples, and all of a sudden you're going to look up and have a really deep roster.
That is Tyler Rucker from No Ceilings. Go check out the page and see what it's all about. We thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Todd.
All right, that was Tyler Rucker from No Ceilings talking about the Blazers 2025 draft pick. I think he's on to something. I think this is probably the most important draft the Blazers have had of this generation. Like, you get a guy like Shaedon, you get a guy like Scoot, you get a guy like Donovan. Like, that's your core. This, I think, is the one. Can this put you over the edge? No matter what they do. Draft, trade out, trade up.
It is interesting because, we've talked about it earlier. SGA is not a top 10 pick.
Nope.
Tyrese Halliburton's not a top 10 pick. Like the J-Dub is not a top 10 pick. Like, you just look at all these guys and you're like,
Steph Curry's not a top 10 pick.
You just find these guys.
Yeah,
he was.
My
Yeah,
bad.
top 10. But
I got ahead of myself.
You had 2 Minnesota point guards go in front of him. He was the 3rd point guard.
Yeah.
But no, he wasn't a top 5 pick.
Yeah.
Like you can find like Giannis is not a top 10 pick. Yes, you can. These are exceptions, not rules.
Right.
Like that's the whole point.
You can get a Draymond in the 2nd round. Shane Battier is not a top 10 pick.
Like finding those guys and making that make sense. And this is why I always say luck plays such a huge factor in this stuff.
It really does.
And nobody wants to admit it because you're not the controller of your destiny. But if the luck goes your way, and let's just say they take Carter Bryant. Let's say Carter Bryant turns into like some OG Anunoby, Andre.
I love that he said Shane Battier. I would die to have a 20-year career of a dude like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is if you're picking an 11, you get a guy like we talked about the Mike Conley, Greg Oden draft class. Like 4 of the 5 guys, basically, other than Greg, are still playing.
Yeah.
Like, Al Horford still playing, Mike Conley still playing, Jeff
Durant
Green
still
still playing,
playing.
Durant still playing,
Yep.
and you're like,
Yeah, Jeff Green.
you find guys that have 15+ year careers in the draft. No matter where you draft them, you did good.
And I think it's just like you nailed it with the luck. With the way college basketball landscape is these days, you don't like SGA is 26.
Yeah.
And we didn't know he was going to be this till he was 24.
We knew he was going to be good,
but we didn't know how good.
Like,
so it's like
you thought maybe all-star.
Yeah.
And then it went from, oh no, he's
might
an
be
all-star.
more.
And then it was like, oh, there's another gear.
Yeah.
But like nobody, like that's why he was drafted where he was drafted. Nobody looked at him and was like, that's a future MVP.
You won't know if Scoot Henderson is worth a damn for probably 3 more years. Just because the kids are coming in so young.
Yeah. You come in the league at, Cooper Flagg is going to start playing in the NBA at 18 years old.
Yeah, he's like, he should be a senior in high school.
He should have been last year.
Yeah.
Yeah. This should have been his freshman year in college coming this next year. He turned 18 in December. So he will play 3 months basically in the NBA before he's 19 years old. And yet everybody's looking at him and going,
well,
that guy's a franchise-defining star.
I mean, we knew that with LeBron.
Mm-hmm.
There are guys that you just kind of know that with.
And
You knew that with Hakeem. You knew that with Patrick Ewing.
Think that with Zion and Ja. Like,
exactly, but they don't.
It can blow up in your face.
And, and both those guys could resurge, but outlook not so good right now.
Not great.